In this lesson, we're going to learn about keyframe interpolation and how to fix Bezier curves that have a boomerang effect. Okay, so this boomerang effect is a really common problem that happens to animations in After Effects. It's caused by the default interpolation that After Effects gives to keyframes that you set up in a certain order. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of recreate this effect for you, and pretty quickly you're going to realize if you've ever encountered this effect, what's causing it. And it can be pretty annoying. So we're just going to start off here. I have animated a camera using a null object. So I have my null, or my camera, parented to my null. So I'm just going to be using the null to move through this little scene. So with my current time indicator right here at the very beginning, I'm just going to go ahead and set a position keyframe. And then I'm going to move through here towards the end of the comp. And I'm just going to zoom in by grabbing that Z handle and zooming towards this little person. So we kind of have a shot that looks like this when I scrub through it. So that's pretty basic. We're not getting any kind of boomeranging yet. But what if maybe about halfway through this shot, I actually want to go to a different position, pause there, and then continue on to that last key. So let's kind of come to just right about there in your timeline. So I'm at about 1 second and 14 frames. And I'm just going to grab my null and drag it over here so that I'm zooming in on this third person. So now we have an animation that looks like this, kind of just zooming from one person to the next. But this is a little jarring, so I want to pause when I'm at this person in the middle, and then we'll move on to our last key. So just however long I want my pause to be, I'm going to kind of move forward just right about there, about 2 seconds and 12 frames. And then I'll copy and paste that keyframe that we had earlier. So go ahead and select that keyframe, and then you can hit Control-C, and then right after it Control-V, and that'll paste that previous keyframe. So now let's drag through and see what we have. We come forward, we hit that key, and then in the position where we wanted there to be a pause, we get this boomerang effect where our camera zooms in, back out, and in again. And then we continue on to our last person. So it always is so confusing when something like this happens, because you know, if you look at the values over here for your position property, these keys have exactly the same values. Those numbers don't change, but the frames in between them would indicate that something else is happening, and you're getting this strange effect where it's zooming in and out. What's happening is your spatial interpolation is being affected. So what spatial interpolation is that it gives you kind of those rounded curves whenever you set up these keys. So you see that we have these handles here. Now you know that if you created something, just maybe a path that had any kind of curve in it, that would be what you would consider a Bezier curve. So spatial paths for camera paths or objects are exactly the same, and their interpolation is affected by the way that you draw them. So because we drew our very first keyframe just by kind of starting out here, then our last, and then added to it in the middle, it assumed that we wanted to create a curve or a Bezier curve. So that not only affected the interpolation as far as the speed we move from object to object, but it affected the position that the null object took as it did that. So that's why we're getting this zoom in and out effect here. Now there's two ways to fix this. The first way I'm going to show you is an easy kind of quick fix, and it's going to be something that you may do when you're in a hurry, but it's a little bit harder to tweak if you're wanting to have those curves in your path. So you'll notice how we get a little bit of a curve, kind of how we come out farther to the side here, and then as we zoom in and lock in on that key, this guy kind of just comes back in a little bit more to the right. So you kind of see how you really start to get that curve there. This is going to take that curve away a little bit, so to speak. So the way that we fix this is you simply highlight this keyframe, and then we'll come up here to animation, and then you see this button right here that says toggle hold keyframe. So we'll go ahead and click that. And now as I scrub through here, we see that we stop on our hold keyframe and we no longer have that boomerang effect from keyframe to keyframe. So what's happening here is that it's saying until we reach another keyframe, there should be no motion at all. So sometimes this is going to help you out, sometimes it's not going to. It depends on what kind of animation it is. For this animation, this is exactly the look that we were wanting. So once I reach the second keyframe, we continue on our path and we move through there towards the very end. And that's exactly what you want. Sometimes that's going to be the perfect way to fix this problem. Now I'm going to undo that and we're going to talk about a little bit different, slightly more complicated way to fix it, but it gives you greater flexibility in the end. We're going to select both of these keyframes and then come back up there to the same place, animation, and click on that keyframe interpolation. So this is going to give you a little bit of an insight into what we were talking about earlier with keyframe interpolation. So here we have our temporal interpolation and our spatial interpolation. Right now our temporal interpolation says that it's linear, and we know that that's true because all of the keyframes on our timeline have this little diamond shape. And that just means that we're not using any kind of easy ease, easy in, or ease out for any of those keys. They're all set to just a plain linear keyframe. And that's what that is just defaulting to. Now our spatial interpolation is set to continuous Bezier, and that's what's causing the problem. When we get to this keyframe here, it wants to continue that curve on, so it's causing us to move in and out, and that's what's giving us that undesirable effect. So these two keyframes here, I'm going to change to a different kind of spatial interpolation, and that's going to give me that stop that I want in between those two keys. So we'll come up here and drop that down where it says continuous Bezier and choose linear, and then we'll say OK to that. And you see that this caused us to change that path just a little bit. So now that path looks like it's straightened out. And I'm just going to scrub through here. And you see that that boomerang effect has been lost. So two ways to fix that. One way requires a few more steps, but now if I want to come in there and maybe add any kind of other animation in between these two keys, I would have the option to do that, and the hold keyframe isn't gonna hold me back at all. So in this lesson, we learned what causes the annoying boomerang effect and how to fix that in your own animations.